a half-smoked cigarette, a piece of gum, a headless toy, or a pair of used underwear. I was the lonesome cat without its bottle. I had been run over and pushed to the side through traffic, wind, and other forms of aggression. At the same time, a dissipating high told me that I could do it all over again. It was the body tricking me into thinking that giving birth made me invincible. In the rushed moments after Button was born, the room buzzed with nurses and doctors coming in and out, checking on me, checking on the baby, checking on information listed on screens, lines and numbers here and there. Controls were pushed. Bed sheets, pillows, and crinkly paper covers were adjusted or discarded and replaced with fresh ones. Liquids poured out of me. Liquids were pushed into my veins, and a catheter was pricked into my urethra. The day was on wheels, including us, and the next thing I knew, we were being carted around. This is just one example of how life is made, and in my case, it was done brutally. But I'm not sure it's possible to avoid brutality in birth. Brutus, bruto. A man-made beast is not quite what I mean when wanting to describe the experience, and yet it's the first thing that comes to mind. Words and expressions flickered in front of my eyes. John bounced gently to and from, always in the way of someone trying to get to me, and unsure of how to manage his presence around others. He said he was relieved that Button was born on the weekend, and it helped him avoid taking time off from work, whereas I had no understanding of time. I only wanted to know where we were being taken. While I was rolled down long, nondescript hallways, I kept thinking, I give in to this moment. I didn't have a choice. In the evening, when the stream of hospital employees or our friends and John's family died down and the room was still as if I were forgotten, all I felt were my early exposed nipples sore from Button's first sucks. There were faint echoes of babies crying and nurses chatting in the background, indicating that the night shift would soon begin. The lower part of my body was numb from medication, and with my crotch awkwardly wet from my ice pack melting between my legs, I wanted to twist her head. Button had been with me for a handful of hours. She had been silent for most of this time, and there came an urge, as direct as hunger. Let's wring you like a wet cloth. The dark hospital room took my wand and immediately threw it back at me.
Thank you for reading that. I'm curious, like, how many people here have read the book? Oh, fun. Okay, cool.
Sweet. Lisa, you better have, yeah.
We'll get to that too. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this book. I've been thinking a lot about it, and what it reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's been in this situation where you have never birthed a baby yourself, and let's say your close friend has, and you say to your friend, and your friend has given birth, and you say, what was it like, what is it like, let's say they have a 4-week-old, and you say, what is it like, and you actually really want to know the truth, because you can't make an informed decision if you don't actually know the truth, and your friend usually responds of saying, like, it's fucking crazy, you know what I mean, like, they don't actually. And what I actually want is that, like, mm-hmm. I actually can handle it, and this was the first time I have ever experienced, like, that's actually the answer that I'm looking for. So I think it's so brilliant. I've never read anything like it, and so congratulations. Yeah, it's so wonderful. I'm not gonna cry. It's so amazing. So I want you to talk a little bit about, so the way it's very like this claustrophobic book, and there's not, the characters are the narrator, the baby who's called Button, the husband, and an elderly man who lives in the apartment above or a few floors above. Other than that, there's people in the periphery. So it's this very kind of claustrophobic novel, and I thought you did such a great job with that. And I would love to hear you talk about time and how you used it in the novel. I noticed there was this sort of trickery where, as the reader, I would think we were at a certain point of okay, the newborn is maybe it's been a few months or something, and then suddenly I would turn the page and we would be back in the hospital or giving birth or home the first day after birth. And I thought that was so interesting. I would love to hear you talk about the structure and how you did that.
Yeah, so in the beginning, I don't know if other writers feel that way. I don't know if you feel that way, but in the beginning, it was so much about just like collecting scenes and collecting like ideas for the book, and you feel like very precious about each sentence. Like you don't want to like take anything out, and then so it wasn't until like I had kind of like a chunk to show to other people where it started to become apparent to me that like it would be nice to have like a framework around the story and limiting it to pretty much like a week, or like 10 days. So both like a framework around time, but also a framework around where like physically where we're going to be. So we're only going to be in this apartment, and um, and then playing with the idea of like even if within these like parameters, you can you can be a kind of time traveler. You can also go back to her childhood, but the kind of like present that we're always in is in this apartment building, and it's the upstairs neighbor who's coming down to complain about the baby, and they develop a friendship of sorts, and he ends up becoming, for a while I couldn't quite decide if Peter would be real or not, but he ends up becoming this like pillar for her to express these things that she's going through.
Right, because she doesn't have anyone else in the novel who she can complain about the baby with. So, yeah, I think in one of the reviews it described Peter, this character Peter, as tactless, but at the same time it's like the narrator actually needs that. So it's a really interesting thing. And also him being elderly, having a newborn and an elderly person. And then there's the husband who's sort of more the picture of health. There's a few mentions of him like making a smoothie. And it's mentioned in this way of like, it's so crazy that he would even have the thought to make a smoothie, because of what is going on with the baby.
People make smoothies all the time.
They do, but in this situation, it's like how could this person be making? It was such a great detail to show these two different worlds that people were in, even though they were in the same apartment. They were leading these completely different lives. So that's interesting. So you like use these constraints pretty early on, where you said, okay, it's going to take place in the apartment. I think toward the end, they go outside at the end. Yeah, okay. I don't want to spoilers. It's not the kind of book that can be spoiled.
It's kind of happy ending.
Yeah,
right? Would you...
yeah, and I don't think that ruins the read in any way. Yeah, it's kind of a happy ending. And you definitely don't see a happy ending coming. So, so you put that constraint on there pretty early of not leaving the apartment, the character not leaving the apartment, and then you said it was going to be 10 days or a week. Is that what it was? I couldn't really tell, but it didn't really completely matter to me. So was it 10 days?
Yeah, it was, I guess part of that was also because like if, like on the kind of like practical level, you will get into trouble if you keep your baby in, locked in. Because like there will be pediatricians who will want to check in on their baby, and so like it was interesting to like play around with like what reality expects from new mothers, where you need to go to
doctor's appointment.
So many doctor's appointments, and also for the mother, there are a few checkups, and so as soon as like both intentionally like limiting it to a certain time, that I also wanted to like limit things that we know about our protagonist and know about Button, because as soon as I put more information in there, the book kind of like then opens up to other possibilities, like whether it is like should I introduce like her father in this, or like other family members, like what and so it was like very intentionally I wanted her to be this kind of like person in this like no man's land, where you can a few things about her background, but you still want to maybe you're still able to like relate to her or to the other characters in the book.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that was it was a really interesting structure. And yeah, time just sort of disintegrates throughout, and then suddenly the narrator is pregnant again, and it mimics so much what a life is like in these sort of, I hesitate to call them flashbacks at all, because they didn't feel anything like that. It just felt like you're moving through the world. It's really interesting. And yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Peter character, this elderly man who's not quite a companion. It's sort of like a point of contention and a companion at the same time. And how that worked, and how early in your process he came into the novel.
Yeah, so a long time ago, I worked with the David Wojnarowicz estate. I was trying to work for the estate, and it was handled by an older man, Tom Raffenbar, who was David's partner back in the days, and a way in which I wanted to work with him led to, or trying to work with him meant that I needed to go visit him, and he happened to live in Morningside Heights in this like very, very dark apartment, and his health was also deteriorating, and he was incredibly rude and just this like bitter man, but obviously like cared and so deeply for David's work and did so much for it, and it just like going to visit him in his apartment was this like very it made such a deep impression on me that I kind of had to take part of his character as like an introduction to Peter. So he was kind of my inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a helpful character, and I think he's not really an outside perspective because he doesn't leave the apartment either. So it's almost like the narrator finds her match in him in this interesting way when she isn't connecting with anyone. Yeah, I really felt very tenderly toward Peter.
Yeah, and he's also going through, his own, he's coming down to first complain about the baby, but then you soon realize that, he's going through grief of his own because he's just lost his wife, and like through both of them having lost, a part of themselves, they're able to kind of connect around that.
Yeah, and then on that note of grief, there's even more on the periphery. There's a mother character of the narrator's mother who has passed away, and we don't know that many details, and it only comes up a few times, I want to say, at least in my reading of it, my memory of it. Could you talk a little bit about that choice as well, and how she was serving the narrative?
Yeah, so I was really intrigued by how, like, when there's like an event that happens to you, when there's both this like very very big change to your identity and your physical self, I was intrigued by the notion of like wanting to become a child again, and like wanting to kind of like retreat to whatever it is, like your comfort zone, where if it's your mother or your father, and in this case I just chose the mother figure, where as soon as our protagonist gives birth, she immediately feels like she wants to be a child again, but there is nobody there to comfort her, and so you're also kind of brought back to how she lost her mother, and what that has meant to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of walk the line of like surrealism in the book, and how it's like when I was hearing the description being read, it does kind of sound like a thriller in ways, and it does have those tones. How did you manage to do that, and did you ever like go further into that realm, or consider going further into that realm?
Yeah, that was really hard. Because I feel like as soon as you kind of like introduce the possibility of one character harming another, you have to decide like how far will you take it before it turns into a horror story or like a thriller.
Yeah.
And I just like didn't. I wanted the reader to still feel that even though the protagonist has these like dark and difficult thoughts, that Button is going to be fine. And that was still also a challenge to make things interesting, while being kind of like held in this like odd grasp of like, will she or won't she?
Right.
And then, what was more to your question?
Well, it sounds like you were protecting the reader.
The genres, yeah.
The genre of like.
Yeah, and also, I think if anybody has gone through not sleeping for lengths of time, things will happen to your brain and mind, and maybe there will be animals cropping up, or insects, or things, moss. Yeah. And so I thought that was also interesting to play around with, the borders of like your sanity versus insanity as well.
Yes. You have a couple lines. You have the line about, I'm paraphrasing, but about like, has changing a diaper ever like been depicted in literature, and also about, what was the other one, like, has holding someone for this many hours ever been depicted in literature? And it's said more beautifully than I'm saying in the book. Why do you think that hasn't been depicted in literature? And were there any books that guided you for this, or were helpful in any way, or was there sort of nothing? I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think it's not been done before because men have been writing the stories, and maybe we have not taken female stories as seriously, or maybe women have not felt like permission to do it. I don't know. But I think it's also quite wonderful that like even this like short amount of time of like having started writing it in 2018, there are so many more wonderful stories about motherhood or choosing not to become a mother, and so maybe it's also the question of like domesticity, like kind of like belittling it, even though like Knausgård has been doing it for thousands of pages, and so I think indirectly the books that have inspired me, like the way she decided to construct her sentences is really playful and exciting, and it doesn't, the books I've been intrigued with don't necessarily deal with motherhood themes, or and also I think in terms of like the repetition or writing about trauma, I think Yanagihara's A Little Life is a masterpiece in terms of like, how did she accomplish, like writing so forcefully about, very dark and difficult things without it feeling like it's too repetitive. But she somehow sort of just keeps on braiding this intricate braid that I thought was just like masterful.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you do the same thing in yours. So you looked to other books for structure.
If like anybody who was like not cool, unusual, it was just like thrown out, like very hastily, and I don't think it was like. I think it was like until much later that I realized that it came from the Swedish word missfoster, which is a failed fetus, which is and so it's just like I just became like also like very fixated on this idea that like she possibly feels like a failed mother for not understanding like how to take care of Button. She's also sort of connecting it with times in her childhood when her classmates were accepting of her.
Yeah, I thought that was a really, really interesting thing to hear throughout. I never heard before. Do you want to to talk a little bit about who was your editor for this book?
Lisa,
Was it Lisa?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about like the editorial relationship and what that process looked like for you guys?
Yeah, she's in the craft side. You want to answer this, Lisa? No, so I was very, very lucky because I had Lisa's input and I also had UK editor's input. And, so it was just like these like two wonderful women who, have just like very different backgrounds, very different experiences, so much knowledge. And, they were like, Lisa was always just like guiding and encouraging me to just like go balls to the walls. But is it one ball you take your balls to, or it's two balls? Oh, sorry, no, you have two balls for one ball. Okay. Sorry. This is when the foreign comes at. Okay, so, two balls to one wall. She's told me to take them there, and I did, and it was really wonderful to like hear somebody say that like, I see what you're doing. Let's just let's take it as far as you can, within the confines of like making sure that the reader will be entertained or find it still like a good read.
Was there a lot of back and forth, or like how many drafts of this? I like kind of the nitty gritty of editing. Like how many drafts of it? You said you started in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that was also really interesting because I thought I think the British writer Hannah Sullivan has expressed that like she's a writer like on the page, so she's like she feels more like a writer as she's editing her work, and I didn't quite understand it until this experience where this is like 50-60 drafts. Like there's like I feel no shame in like more drafts.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like interesting to like discover like when do you end up feeling like, okay, this is done, and that is never.
Yeah.
So went through multiple drafts with my agent Kate, and then multiple drafts with Lisa and Juliet in the UK, and then copy editors were incredibly patient with me, with still more drafts, or like, because it's also like a very short book in a way, and so to have a sentence that doesn't sit right will just like stand out so much more. So it was excruciating.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I wanted the number, so thanks for the 50, 60.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is, some people are like, it's 3, 50, 60, yeah. Makes it feel better. Can you talk a little bit about the cover? I was thinking about how The Chronology of Water by Lydia Yuknovich has a nipple on it, and that came out in 2012, and at the time, there was actually like I don't know the word for it, there's like a flap over it that would cover the nipple that would have, it had water on it, and if you took it off, what is it called? A belly band. Yeah, it had a belly band over her nipple. I don't know if you knew that.
That was like a photograph. That was like a real
It was her real
Yeah.
nipple. Yeah, it was her real nipple. You're right. So you would take it off and then her nipple, but they would have it in stores covered up. So I think that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in stores without the belly band now. I don't know, but can you talk a little bit about that? I know a lot of people don't, including myself. You glance at it and you don't see the nipple in the milk. Can you talk about it?
Linda Wang did just this like brilliant job where she sent I think like 7 or 8 suggestions, all very boob, chest heavy, symbolic jackets, all very beautiful, and I'm just very thankful that everybody at Pantheon supported this choice.
And did you know that was the one when you saw it, or
Did you
go back and forth for a little while?
No, it was so striking compared. Like the other ones were also really, really great, but like it was. I mean, it's hard to say no to. to a novel driven by the book.
Yeah, it's so wonderful.
So, I mean,
It
just
captures
great.
the book so well. It's so great. How are we doing for time? Should we do one more question? Okay. I read, and well, I guess we could talk about in the New York Times review, by Claire Tedder, who I like a lot. She talks about the line that you have, I think comes sort of maybe in the middle-ish of the book, that says, "I used to be a translator, and now I'm a myth-bar." Could you talk about that sentence? She actually begins her review with it, and in that sentence is just the whole sort of book and identity, if you had to condense it into one. So can you talk about, like, when in your process did that sentence come to you, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah,
The narrator was a translator,
yeah.
like, working all the time and translating books and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was partly, again, kind of like exploring this idea of identity, in terms of, you have this like vision of yourself for so long, and then something changes, and the only thing that, which I also really appreciate in the review, the only thing that I could sort of like compare it to was going to war, and just like having read about that experience, it does feel like you just don't come back as the same person anymore. And so I guess with our protagonist's case, I was also intrigued with the fact that, like, she was like somebody who was just like perfectly fine with, being at home, working from home, just like working alone as well at her desk, and really like her simple pleasures is just like sitting on her stoop with a cup of coffee and not talking to people really, but also having like a loving relationship with her husband, and then like suddenly you're just kind of like a vessel, you're just this like bar that's serving and not getting any tips or
Right. And there's this scene too where she goes out for coffee with a friend who has a newborn, and the protagonist doesn't have a newborn yet, and it's really interesting because she's judging her friend, and at the end of the coffee date or the lunch, the friend says the key is to stop wanting things, and the protagonist has really, it doesn't sit until it does later on. Yeah, and there's also this, you're reminding me, like, this beautiful scene is incredibly mundane of these two, of the protagonist and her husband, and they get takeout, they eat food, they sit on the couch, like, that's the whole scene. It goes on for like 3 pages, and then at the end it says that these simple moments were the things that would be taken away. And I thought that was really, really well done. And one more, there's one toward the beginning where she's home from birth, and the husband character is walking around like not dressed yet, and his penis is out, and you like describe this. You make it like it's just the craziest thing ever. Like, now that she's in this new environment and home from the hospital, to like see a penis, and it's just this like very almost
like
violent.
yeah.
It's like this violent thing, like she's perceiving the whole room completely different and how it's decorated, and then like a penis, and I think all of it's so brilliant. That kind of stood on its own, but I did have that written down. I wanted to talk about it. Yeah.
No, it's fun to write about penises.
Yeah. Well, we could open up for questions if people have some.
Yes. May 15th. Yeah. um, yeah.
I can just repeat it for the YouTube
sorry, go
people.
ahead, yes.
The question was, in the 50 or 60 drafts, what was cut out? Is there anything any scenes, deleted scenes that you can talk about, or things that maybe could have stayed in, or that process?
Yeah, it's such a. I don't know when you decide like how to find that balance. I guess it's just again like rereading and giving it time and tweaking it some more. But there were definitely, walking the fine line of, I guess the relationship between John and the protagonist, where I wanted her to have enough space for the reader to see her frustration, but also not letting it be like too unfair to the husband, because there's actually nothing wrong with it he's doing. Like, he's like also just doing his best, and it's just like kind of like the question of like this marriage, which is also like fairly new, is also going through this like very big change. So it's a change for both of them. And so I guess there were definitely a few scenes where like between the protagonist and John, that I decided to pull back off, just so that people would kind of like still appreciate the marriage that was made.
Other questions? Comments? Question was how are you viewing your book since its inception now that it's out in the world?
It still feels, so new and fresh. I think I'm still processing this whole experience. It also, I guess, like, because I was writing it for myself, I had no idea that people would want to hear this, and it's been really, really lovely that people have already like started coming and saying like, I feel seen, whether it is the fact that like now they've read this and they don't want to have children, or they've read this and they feel like they've gone through similar things, and that's just like it's just so it's wonderful and wild and great that like people can just like take what they want from it.
One more?
I have another thing. But this is very like short question. But in the Library of Congress catalog, it's a subject for fiction. Do you actually think that?
No, I don't. Who thinks
determines
that?
That's the
Lisa.
like how does that go
Charter
down in the
Lisa.
Library of Congress?
Zach. You didn't.
Like, is it actually a book about postpartum depression? You spoke about it.
Debatable.
I mean, I'm not gonna say it's not. But yeah, I'm not the one that decided the stamps. It is interesting.
Yeah, because that's how it's cataloged.
Library of Congress. I appreciate it.
Exactly.
Oh, finding the book. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think with books you have to, unfortunately, like reduce them to 3 words in this case, which was, what was it, postpartum motherhood. fiction, which sure, and also not at all, but because it does feel for a book that is this enormous, it does feel reductive. I personally didn't even want to use that word, although I know that is a word of what this person is working with, but it also, the word like transformation and identity feels so much more, I think I read in an interview or review, it's more of the state that you go into, that anyone would go into after giving birth, instead of this sort of label of a medical diagnosis of postpartum. But that's what's funny about books is they need a title, they need a blurb, they need, to know where they're going to be shelved. So funny. That's a good question.
Very granular.
Yeah. Anything else? Go ahead.
So I remember
The question is, how do you talk about the novel outside of, in terms of maybe being honest, not scaring people, as you said?
Talk about the novel? Talk
The
about
pregnancy process.
I think it's such a delicate thing because the joy of that mother, or soon to be mother, is not something I would want to take from them, and there is so much joy in that. I think I've just framed it more as like just and because there are many, even sort of much later, there are many moments where you need somebody, and so and also because the physical changes are so different for everybody, so it's more just about opening up ones.
Any last questions? Well, Sylvia's going to be signing books, so a lot of people have books in their hands. Definitely recommend getting the book. It is so unique and lovely, scary, and so wonderfully constructed, and I highly recommend it. And congratulations again.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out tonight. Thank you to all of you who asked fantastic questions. Thank you, Chloe, for coming down to moderate tonight's discussion. And of course, thank you, Szilvia, for celebrating this wonderful debut with us. As Chloe just said, Szilvia will be signing books. My coworker, Jules, is going to point right now to where that is. It's a little bit hidden, but it'll all make sense in a minute. So we'll ask that you all form a line kind of going down the center aisle and curving around. Of course, we do have plenty of additional copies of the Nursery available for purchase, as well as Chloe's most recent book, The Red Zone, which honestly would make a fantastic accompanying read. So I highly recommend checking those out. If you're still with us on the YouTube live stream, you can buy both of those books by clicking the link in the live stream description. All right, that's all. Let's give these two one last round of applause.